When I went back as an instructor, I always took the good things and the bad things from those I'd met in the military. I really changed the molds of instructing. I never asked of my students that I couldn't do myself. If we had to do wet and dry drills getting in the freezing cold river, I would get in there with them. I wouldn't stand there and scream and shout. But what I found with that is I got so much more from the students than I was giving my instructors.
Because of our own fears and insecurities of what's it going to identify if I admit, man, I did that wrong. We all have the same fears. We all have the same desires. We all have the same wants. And that's what binds us all.
There's a lot of people who just walk by, a bit like the Israeli situation. I could have quite happily just stayed at home and hoped that another security company goes out. But if we all thought like that, then we'd all be waiting for someone else to do it. So I always think if you have the capability and the capacity, then help.
Before we jump into this episode, I'd love to invite you to be a part of the community where you can listen to more content to help you be a smarter, stronger, and better equipped, successful leader. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button. I would love and appreciate your support. It's amazing to me to watch the community grow and read all of your comments each and every week. I can't wait to go on the journey with you. Thank you so much, and it means the world to me. Welcome to the Impact Driven Leader podcast with your host, me, Tyler Dickerhoof. Today, I have the esteemed Dean Stott. Dean, also known as the Frogman, is a British Special Forces, retired. He went through the entire process, became one of the first individuals to be on the Special Boat Service coming out of the Army. He's also gone on to become a world record holder, Guinness World Record holder in cycling. We'll talk more about that. He's an author of the book Relentless. He's a dad of 3. He also is follicularly challenged, nice, bald, shiny head. I appreciate that and enjoy talking to another man who embraces, just let it go. Dean, thanks for being here with me, man.
No, absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So let's, for the audience that, is a way to, that's your introduction, but as a way to get to know you kind of either from the start or, man, one thing that you shared as we were kind of getting into this introduction is the ability to see repeated success, right? And the different from going from special forces into speaking, into private security, into, riding a bike, those different elements. One thing that I want to know is, as you see that through line of what you've been able to accomplish, where did that start? Where did that come? Where do you look back and say, ooh, that's when I was able to develop it?
Yeah, I think for myself, I always get the question, is it nature or nurture? And that's always a good one. Like my father, he was in the military. He was, I always called the Ted Lasso of the army. He was the soccer manager, player and coach. So his career was focused around sport. So very, very competitive, very driven. And as a young boy growing up in that house, everything was competition. But when did I know myself that I had the abilities to succeed and do well? That wasn't until I actually joined the military. I told my father my intentions of joining the military, and he told me I'd last 2 minutes, which wasn't the warm, comforting words that I'd expected. But that was again, it may also have been reverse psychology, that they gave me the drive and everything else to join the military at a young age. I joined at the age of 17. By the age of 21, I was airborne commando diver. I was already in the tier 2 special forces. But it was probably that period from 17, I'd say, to 20. I joined, I was probably 130 pounds soaking wet through. I was 5'7". I wasn't the 200-pound guy in front of you at the moment. But when I was doing each course, I never had any aspirations of being in the special forces. I didn't know much about the special forces. My knowledge of the military was from my father, which was basically sport. And so every time I did a course, I soon realized that actually I was almost like top 25% of the group. So physically I was growing. I've developed quite quickly in about 18 months to 200 pounds from 130. But then mentally I was getting stronger. And so each time I did a course, I then sort of thought, well, what's next? And then started achieving that. And then it all became anything's possible within your realms. And my career was then focusing in one direction. I ended up going tier 1 special forces. So the SBS, or the Special Boat Service equivalent here in the US, is SEAL Team 6. But coming from an army background, it's like a ranger saying that he's not going to go Delta Force and he's going to go SEAL Team 6. But unlike here, the US, where Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 have their own selection, ours is joint with the SAS. And so again, I was also met with a lot of naysayers, even the special boats, people like, you can't do it. Why are you doing this? And so for me, there was like, I was confident in my abilities. I'd seen guys that had passed and failed, and I knew where I sat within that. And so I always used to use that sort of negativity as a positive, prove them wrong. And that was probably one of my driving forces from my father's comment. But going back to your original question, it was probably those early years in the military that I then started believing in myself, that I had those capabilities. So there was an element of nature from my father, but I think a lot was nurture and what I picked up from leaders within the military.
So one thing there, as you share that, and I think about how positive it is, it drove you, but yet, there's also a component that I'm wondering, as you either modeled or you mentored other, servicemen. At what point did you have to break from the I'm doing it to prove others, that I can do it, as opposed to, man, I'm doing this because, man, I'm really good at it. Like, this is something unique that I can do.
Yeah, I think that happened almost at the same time, because I always felt that when, I was in the Royal Engineers and then I went commandos, which is, they basically work alongside, you earn the Green Beret and work alongside the Royal Marines. So that whole period that you're in there, you're almost an ambassador for your unit, representing them against the Royal Marines. And then at a young age, at 21, I ended up being the commando instructor, so working alongside Royal Marines. So there was always this element of having to prove to people that we were able to stand alongside them, and if not, be slightly ahead. I loved it. I loved the military. It was a very competitive environment. But that sort of going from understanding to being a mentor, I remember doing my commando course at 18, and the instructors would just scream and shout. I learned nothing on my commando course other than how to be fit and how to be cold. And so for me, when I went back as an instructor, I always took the good things and the bad things from those that I'd met in the military, because you are an ambassador, for your unit, but also you're going to be serving alongside these guys when they finish. They're going to be coming to your unit as well. And so for me, I always remember how I felt about my instructors, and a lot of it wasn't positive. I didn't want that to be a reflection on me. And so when I went back as an instructor, I really changed the mold of instructing. I never asked of my students that I couldn't do myself. If I wanted them to do 50 press-ups, I would do those 50 press-ups with them. If we had to do wet and dry drills, getting in the freezing cold river, I would get in there with them. I wouldn't stand there and scream and shout. But what I found with that is I got so much more from the students than I was giving my instructors. I literally just switched off. And so don't get me wrong, if they messed up, they would be punished. But it was almost like they felt that they'd let me down. It was almost like an uncle to them. So for me, that period of time, when I went from a student myself to a mentor, it was literally, I was like a sponge. I was picking the good things that I liked from instructions, and then obviously pushing aside that of bad instruction.
Why do you think you were able to do that? Because so many refuse to, meaning, oh, I'll just model what I saw because that's the way to do it. Whereas you saw, like, oh no, I can do this better.
I probably saw because I'll give you an example. There was 2 instructors on my team, and they would come out every morning and they would just get everyone in the press up machine, scream and shout. But I could see the glaze in the eyes of the student. The courses are hard enough as it is. You don't need to make it then even doubly harder. One of the ethoses of special forces is having a sense of humor, and so for me, I was like, just because your instructors told you to do that doesn't mean you have to be the same. But what it meant was, we have our own section of guys, and I would have a group of 12 guys. They would have their 12. I would keep my 12. My 12 would still be there at the end of the week. And it wasn't because I was easier on them. It was still the same course. They wanted to be there. They wanted to prove. And so for me, it looks well on you as an instructor that you're getting these people through. And it was just a different approach. And then someone did say to me after 2 courses, how are you managing to keep them? And I said, look at my delivery. I don't scream and shout at them. I do everything with them. So for me, it was just just because it happened to me doesn't mean you have to carry it on, that tradition. And I think a lot of people see it. I think Hollywood, the first movie I watched before I joined the military was Full Metal Jacket. And I was like, but it wasn't, yes, it was like that in days of old, but there's evolutions. The military's changed from days of old. I love the whole thing. Was it easier in the olden days than it is now? And there's pros and cons for both.
Yeah.
The equipment of days of old was freezing, but now with the introduction of technology, the equipment's a lot heavier, so the guys have to be a lot stronger. So, yeah, I think the training needs to be adapted and reflective of that as well.
So let's take from that experience, and obviously through your own experience coming through the courses as a commando, then to being an instructor, but then getting into private security. Like, how did you use that, what you gained from, instructing, and say, hey, the response that you got from people is like, man, they were willing to do the work. They were willing to do more. How did you apply that into your, private security business?
Yeah. So the private security, just for the listeners, I did 16 years in the military, and I got injured out after a parachute accident. I had a parachute accident which shortened my career. And so I had no aspirations of leaving the military. I grew up in a military household. I joined the army at 17. I was now 33. I would literally still be in the military now, running a desk somewhere in the special forces. I didn't look at leaving. Thankfully for me, my wife, I met her a year before, very entrepreneurial. She was a bank manager at the time, ran about 4 banks, and still pretty much is the brains behind everything. But yeah, as you said, I got injured out, and within 48 hours, my first job was help to set up the British Embassy in Benghazi during the Arab Spring in 2011. And, when you look at the special forces, Hollywood again doesn't help matters. When you see like Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham, I call it the biceps, the bullets, and the bombs. It's all the explosions and the shooting and things like that. That's 25% of what we do in the special forces. It's called offensive action, which is actually your last resort. 50% of what we do and where we specialize in it is support and influence. It's hearts and minds. It's being embedded with locals, understanding the demographics, the politics, the tribal influences. It's being personable with them. It's understanding what's actually going on the ground. And that's what I did in security, different from others. I would work on my own, whether it's Somalia, Yemen, Libya.
Yeah.
I would be embedded with the locals. I would use as many local security guys as I could, because if I'm putting food and water on their tables, I'm not taking work away from them. So my approach is very, very different. And, I wanted to find a niche within the industry. And I realized that a lot of these big security companies were charging 6-7 figure sums for crisis management evacuation plans, which weren't in place. And so I bought 30 weapons on the black market. I buried them between Tunis and Egypt and designed my own evacuation plans and sort of sold that to the oil and gas sector. So it was almost a mixture of that support and influence, hearts and minds, but also having plans in place. Because, for me in security, you have to be proactive rather than reactive. The amount of times that people have been caught short. And I always say this to my clients, if you sign up to this retainer now, it's 10% of the cost than what it would be if you want me to come rescue you. And so I just looked at what was going on in the industry, and I just identified some gaps, and then just sort of really focused in on that. And that was the crisis management stuff.
2 things that, one in my notes that I've heard you, share in your works before, is being proactive compared to reactive. And that's probably the difference between life and death for you and others.
You can't control the uncontrollable. When I say about the security industry, you can have so much stuff in place, but there's things that catch you out, like natural disasters and things like that. But you have to be proactive. A lot of people don't like the word security, and they don't like paying for security until they need them. And so for me, it's really trying to change that mindset of them, is that, well, as I said, if you employ us now, then we can help you in the long term. A perfect example, the Afghan pullout. We ended up assisting 1,200 people. None of them were our clients. They're actually all let down by their own security clients themselves. And again, because they weren't being proactive. So going into the security industry at the very beginning, that wasn't my mindset about proactive and reactive. It's what I'd learned going along. I'd seen case studies and right, well, if we can change the mindset and get in there early, have a plan in place, then it makes it a lot easier. What people don't really understand with these crisis management evacuation plans is, they have these Fortune 500 companies will sign deals with the insurance companies and say, well, we have insurance in place, but they don't read the terms and conditions. So a lot of these insurance companies will provide an aircraft which will come into the airspace, but they don't actually facilitate you getting from your start point to there. And so for me, that's what I focus on. I call it the first mile. Once you're at the airport, that's the easy bit. And so I sort of look at where there's gaps in the industry and sort of capitalize on that. And that's purely from case studies I've heard of or seen in the past.
Just an element, again, going back to from special forces to private security to riding a bike to, shooting a television series, a Netflix series. There's so many pieces that you can apply that first mile to. I think about, let's talk about your Netflix series, Toughest Forces on Earth. How can you relate what you do there to make that such a good, presentation where it's that same first mile principle?
Again, with that one, it's something, again, they'd never done anything like this. It was a new show.
Yeah. And
so for me, it was just with that show, it was really interesting. I got asked to do that show probably about 3 years ago. And, the backstory to that is they'd see me on, with the bike ride, I was doing that for the Royal Foundation. So Prince Harry and I did a promo video together, and one of the girls had seen me on that. And so that's how my name ended up going in. And then Netflix came back and said, we want an American, and we ended up doing chemistry tests and things like that. But the first mile really is you had the production company, they had the idea and the concept, they just needed those details. And that's where we came in as hosts, is we were able to sort of showcase this is what happens for real. And it was really interesting because, everyone's like, Dean's quite stoic. He's very, the production company were like, oh, we need to be funny. I'm like, well, I'm not. It's not comedy. I'm just I'm not going to compromise my reputation for your show. But it actually worked out really, really well, the dynamics. It's like Top Gear with guns, but you can't call it Top Gun. It's like 3 hosts that go around the world and showcase what's unique about the Special Forces. But what was great about it is the production company had their idea, and then we would then fill in the gaps and explain this is actually how you do it for real. But now that I know TV, they'll cut and paste things anyway.
Yeah,
to make
it all work.
Yeah. But yeah, it's the same concept. The first mile, it's the attention to detail, not compromising your reputation or your professionalism for something short term.
I want to know about some of the unique pressures in, especially let's talk about, all the preparation, that first mile, which you've referenced. You talked about helping 1,200 people getting out of Afghanistan, or a year ago, almost a year ago to the date, where you helped several hundred people get out of Israel. A unique, interesting perspective as I learned how much you helped there. My wife and I were in Israel right when the world shut down during COVID. We were one of the very last planes out of Israel, and we had Delta, I forget exactly, Air France, and then ended up, that got canceled. So then we were on British Airways, that got canceled, and we're trying to connect our flight. And they said, hey, why don't you either drive to Egypt or drive to Jordan? All right, this was, we're leaving, Tel Aviv, and we're like, it doesn't really work like that. So I had that experience trying to leave the country, and we felt so safe there at that point. But I want you to kind of share the process, what you talked about, right? There may be somebody that has an airplane. Maybe it's in Jordan, maybe it's in Egypt, and you're in Israel, and you're trying to help these families in that first mile. Maybe it wasn't like that, but I'd love to know about that experience and what went well, and what challenges did you had that you had to pivot during that process.
Yeah, so for all your listeners, the unique thing about Israel for me, so some of the other evacuations we did, single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy out of Libya, 18 military and 4 diplomats. The evening your American ambassador got killed in Benghazi, we were there getting an oil company. We've touched on Afghanistan. We did some stuff in Sudan as well. But what was unique about Israel is I'd never been to Israel before. All the other countries I'd been to. And so I already had infrastructure in place. I had safe houses, I had drivers, I had security, I had a plan in place. But as you touched on with the show Netflix, we'd not long finished filming in Jordan. And so in Jordan, I knew everyone from drivers, fixers, all the way up to the colonels in the special forces to King Abdullah. So I knew geographically that was a safe haven. And so what was quite interesting about Israel was I was like, well, me and my wife were in Disneyland on October the 7th when it all started unfolding. October the 8th, my phone was literally blowing off. And so my wife was like, well, I've got you a ticket. As you touched on before, a lot of the flights were getting cancelled. You know, the original flight I was meant to get on, I think it was Turkish Airlines, got cancelled on the way to the airport. And then El Al, which is a Israeli airport.
That's how we got out.
Yeah, El Al were now putting on a lot of flights to get people in. And so managed to jump on one of them. I met a couple of security guys from Israel when I was working around in Africa. And so I messaged them and they said, yeah, we will host you when you come in. So I did everything reverse. I went in. By the time we landed 13 hours later, I say it was myself and my wife was coordinating everything in the back. We had 63 families that needed assistance because I think it was the Sukkot holiday. I think there was 10,000 families alone from New York and Brooklyn that were in Israel. And, you know, when you talk about safety wise, you know, within 48 hours of the October the 7th, you know, 36 hours I was there on the ground. You know, Israel, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem was probably one of the safest places in the world at the time because they were never going to let that happen again. But the issue you then had was commercial airlines. Everyone was cancelling flights. There was a lot of confusion. And so strange enough, we had road moves going out to Jordan, tended to be non-Jewish people were happy to go that route. And I had my people in Jordan looking at that. Alana was running all the, identifying where there was new chartered flights coming in and getting people on there. And then also at the time, you know, this is right back in October 2023, we didn't know whether Lebanon was then going to get involved at this point. And so at this time, as long as it stayed south, we still had the airspace coming in the north. But we also then had to factor, well, if Lebanon then gets in, then the airspace in Tel Aviv will shut down. So we also were then looking at maritime options to Cyprus. So really with this one, all I did was I took the knowledge and experience I had from the previous ones and just did it all reverse. We designed the plan when we were on the ground and got it out. But I think where we were successful is the fact that as a husband and wife, we're quite nimble. We don't need to get a huge team together. We don't need to get approval from the board of directors. And so, you know, we were in 36 hours. It took another week before the next groups got in, but by which time everyone had now left. But this was the first time as well. What again was unique about when you asked what worked, what didn't work was with the previous ones, I already had clients that I was getting in. So once we got those families out, you know, I went on social media and I got likes of Jocko Willink, Jack Carr, Sean Ryan that shared it, you know, Dean was in country. So I saw the pros and cons of social media. There was a lot of hatred going on social media at the time.
Yeah.
But there was a Bible college in the old city of Jerusalem, and the husband and wife are actually from Huntington Beach originally. They've been there 8 years, and they had 15 students, 14 American and 1 Indian. And they'd exhausted all their options. Their flights were all cancelled. They're under a lot of pressure from the families to get out. And Elizabeth, the pastor's wife, follows Jocko, and she basically prayed. She opened her phone, and then there I was on Jocko's stories in Jerusalem, and she messaged on Instagram. Within 45 minutes, I was walking into the oldest Protestant church in the world where they had their Bible college. And then, about 48 hours later, we managed to get all those students out at no cost on chartered flights. And so I did see the good and bad of social media. I broke protocol completely. I would never do that in any of my previous ones. We only let people know I was in country. But this one was a very different approach. To it than the others, but very successful in the end.
So, you know, you obviously shared a little bit about your clientele, and I don't need to know, you know, obviously you're not going to, step out and let know, but the type of clients that you're working with, just give the listeners a perspective, the watchers, the viewers a perspective, like who are you working with and why does that seem to be a continual recurrent source of business for you?
Yeah, so in likes of Libya and places like that, there were more oil and gas companies that had Westerners in the area, and they just wanted to make sure that they had some sort of plan in place. So some of them are like the big Fortune 500 companies who want some sort of infrastructure in place. But one thing we're doing now, a lot of my clients now are big family offices, you know, because I'm talking about successes that we've had overseas, but Here in the US and in other countries, it's the family offices stuff, especially with the online presence. So for me, our client base really ranges from Fortune 500s to family offices, and also anytime my phone would go off, someone needs some help, we would get involved. So it's everything in between. And then as we touched on as well, sometimes companies have been let down by their current security providers as well. So, but yeah, my main sort of focus now when I'm not deployed on them is the family office protection, doing security vulnerability assessments of their properties, identifying what their online presence is, what information people are getting, doing diligence on their staffing. It's a whole beast in itself.
Yeah. I mean, there's an element to where we're in the world, and we're recording this. We're just before the election here in the U.S., and we've had challenges throughout the year, with attempted assassination attempts. We look at more incidents where people are trying to, either gain by attack. It's kind of the ransoms type efforts. How do you see that playing out in the world, and where's the driver, or how do you find a place to where you can provide security and make people feel safe?
Yeah, so it's interesting with that. My phone got blown off the hook as well with that, and we've been engaged with some of his teamers as well. So for me, it's always the balance as well. Is that I call it the media monster. I think the media monster puts this element of fear into everyone every day that, the world is so bad. That's why I tend to work alone. When I go to Somalia, you think Black Hawk Down, you think all this, I end up going spearfishing for lobster off Mogadishu. Yes, there's places that are bad, but there's places that are bad in LA. There's places that are bad in New York, London, but there are also good places and also good people as well. And so for me, I always, I tend to get a lot of phone calls because of something they've seen on the TV or seen on social media as well, which means it's having that impact. But so for me, I tend to come in and I'll give them a realistic picture of what's actually going on. I call it the atmospherics. But also what we like to do as well, especially with the family offices and some of these organizations, is training. One of the programs I'm just about to launch now is the bodyguard mindset. I'm not going to train them to be professional bodyguards, but what I'm going to do is a 2 to 3 day course to teach them about, this is what we think about when we're entering a building. This is where we position ourselves in a restaurant. This is how we drive. We make sure that there's a gap between us and the vehicle at the traffic lights. And so really for them, it's all about education, because at the moment they're being scared. But if they then have a little bit of knowledge, then they don't need to be calling me all the time. That's my aim, is that I don't want people calling me all the time because they've seen something and panicking. And so for me, it's about educating if possible. Yes, there's good and bad anywhere you go in the world, but I always believe that the good outweighs the bad. Everyone tarnishes certain groups with one brush, but I talk about the evacuations, Libya, Sudan, Afghanistan. Obviously post 9/11, the Muslim community got a bad rap here in the US, but none of those would have been successful if it wasn't for that community. When I was in Israel as well, I had Muslims helping Jewish people get out. I had Muslims helping getting Buddhists out, Christians. I had Jewish people helping Christians get out. So for me, it's all about that education, and don't always believe what you see on the TV. There's a reason that they're doing that as well. And it's not to say that that isn't happening, but it's not as bad as you think. So we tend to come in and sort of give them a little bit of an umbrella, really show them what's actually going on, what the actual threats are to them. It may even just be, child exploitation, online protection or something. It might be something like that. Teach them to be safe online. But the more people I can train, give them the tools and the knowledge, then the better. They'll feel safer in themselves because they know what to look for and what not to look for.
Well, I mean, I think that comes back to what you said at the very beginning. It's that support and influence that you do, and it's being proactive to reactive. And it's like, hey, to me, that's a leadership quality. If I can empower and equip people and they can, make decisions on their own, and they can feel, it comes back to when you're an instructor. It's like, hey, I'll get down and do the work with you. But man, by doing the work with you and empowering you, you know that you can do it without me, as opposed to you kind of almost create people to rely on you. Kind of go back to the instructor that's just barking at people they don't think they can do it unless they have somebody screaming and barking at them. Whereas you're like, no, just you can do it on your own. Let me empower you. That's what I pick up on all of that.
Yeah, it is. I'm not trying to make myself unemployed by giving them all the tools I need, because they're still going to need me for certain things. But
they will.
It's almost like prioritizing that they realize actually, because when people ring me, like a crisis management expert, it's like I speak to some of them, and that's not actually a crisis. So really, in their head is sort of highlighting what is actually a crisis and what isn't. But some people, and it's unfortunate, some organizations like to exploit on people's fears and people's positions as well. And I've seen it in some of these places that I go, is that they will exploit that and take a lot of money. And for me, I'm not about that.
Yeah. So, talking about that is you probably see, just as much as you mentioned that, there's safe places in Somalia, in Mogadishu, there's unsafe places in LA. In that same vein, there's probably, security advisors, private security advisors that are ethical like yourself. And then there's others that aren't. And, how do you play in that? How do you manage that playing field?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because there's good players and there's bad players, and for me, it's all about reputation. I don't have a website; it's literally word of mouth, or you can come through the website. But I like to think that people will soon be caught out on that. We come in as well, and we sometimes just do quality control. But it's a hard one. It's a hard one because when I speak to people about security, their experience with security was a bad apple. And it's like, well, we're not always like that. So for me, it's always about relationships. It's not about the security side. It's about them trusting you. But for me, I think, when I evacuated the Canadian embassy, I think we only charged $7,000 for 18 military and 4 diplomats. That's all we needed. That's all I needed to get them out. I could have charged whatever I wanted on that, but that wasn't the aim. The aim was to get them home safely. But then tenfold, I get that back through the reputation. And so for me, I think it will come back eventually. So you can either be quick and be greedy and not last the course, or you can just take your time, build up that reputation, build up that network, and it'll eventually come. But people just like the quick fix, the quick money. But for me, it's always about not what people are saying in front of you, but what they say when you're not in the room.
Yeah. Where did that come from, Dean?
I don't know, actually. That's a good answer. That's a good question. I don't know where it came from. I've been very fortunate that, I've pretty much been around the world. I worked with different cultures. And so literally, again, even now at the age of 47, I'm still learning. I'm like a sponge. I just like to, my wife says my IP is I can talk to anyone from any culture, any age. So whether you're a member of the royal family, at the top end, or whether you're a homeless boy in Mogadishu, I treat everyone exactly the same. And I think also, back to my original story, my parents split up. I ended up in a homeless home in Moss Side in Manchester, which was back in the 80s was the most dangerous place in the UK. So I've been there and I've come up and so I've seen everyone in between. And I just think, it's all about, it's not about legacy at all. It's always about just doing the right thing. So everything me and my wife do, we always like to have the give back. And I think there's a lot of people out there. If everyone did it, then it'd be perfect. But it's just trying to balance it.
Well, I mean, I appreciate it and I admire it. And I mean, I'm grateful, but he's, speaking to have this conversation because that's, for me, it grew up on a farm, that's where it came from. I just, and part of it didn't really matter, right? You take care of animals and you just do that work. And so I think that drive and the grounding, the humility, and what you said, what you just mentioned there is, I've been homeless, like the homeless boy that's probably on the streets of whatever, country that you're in, including this one, the US, but then also being with people that are probably the wealthiest by far in the world. And this is what I've learned being in some of those, not to that extent, but those situations. We all have the same fears. We all have the same desires. We all have the same wants. And that's what binds us all.
Yeah, I think it doesn't, interesting. When I did the bike ride, we did it for a mental health campaign. which range from everything from postnatal depression, young children, teenagers, all the way through to veterans and adults. And you had Prince William and Prince Harry talking to their own mental health issues. You had tier 1 special forces guys talking about so for me, it was like mental health doesn't discriminate. And it's the same with other issues in life. Money's, and my wife teaches me this, money comes and goes. That's what she said. Money comes and goes. For me, I was like, okay, yeah, I get that now. And so, but for us, I think with me and my wife, I always, if you have the capability and the capacity to help people, then I think you should. There's a lot of people who just like walk by, a bit like the Israeli situation. I could have quite happily just stayed at home and hoped that another security company goes out. But if we all thought like that, then we'd all be waiting for someone else to do it. So I always think if you have the capability and the capacity, then help.
Being in that kind of that mindset, we look at the examples of the service companies, and again, the private service, but also then I would say our own, secret service, whatever else. Just in your mind, in your leadership perspective, where does that go wrong where they don't have that mindset? What you just said is like, man, if it's our job, we need to just take care of people.
Again, I think it starts at the top. You just might have the wrong people at the top. But hopefully when people see that it's going wrong and something needs to change, the next generation coming up or the next leaders within them will do something slightly different. It's one of the ones, if it's not working, then change it. We have a great thing in the special forces. One reason we're one of the best special forces in the world isn't because we have the best guys and the best training and caliber of training, etc. It's because we're always learning from our mistakes. And one thing we would do, it's called anytime we came off the ground on operations or did any training exercises, before we go clean our weapons, have food, have a shower, whilst it's still fresh in our minds, we would do what's called a hot debrief. And literally it was 3 simple questions. What worked? What didn't work? And if we were to do that again, what would we do differently? And I think that's a great free set of questions for anything you do, anything in business, anything whether you're doing a bike ride, whether you're a carpenter and you're looking at your bit of work and like, right, what would I do differently after? I think we should always be striving to be better. And so your question about those agencies, they should be having those conversations every day.
Which is interesting to me is, I mentioned my friends in the SEALs.
Yeah.
And, friends of mine in the Marines, after action reviews.
Yeah.
Hey,
wash ups.
What went well?
Wash ups.
What didn't? What should we do different? What you just mentioned. And I think this is what I've experienced in leadership and is we don't do those things because of our own fears and insecurities of what's it going to identify if I admit, man, I did that wrong. And, it almost the humility and the empathy to, again, in situations where you've probably been in theater, you've been in, trying to support ones like, oh, I did that wrong. Oh, man, I did that wrong. But there had to be a comfort and security and trust developed that, man, that's the only way forward.
Yeah, I think what I found from my time in the military is humility is one of our ethoses of our special forces, humility and humor. And so, but when you have a new guy coming in, and you say new guy, you don't know what his background is or what he's done. And one of the things we used to do that was great in the special forces, you'll have the team leader who's planning that operation. And then he'll then present to the group. But what he'll do is he'll go around the group and ask any questions and it might be the youngest guy. The youngest guy may have done something similar when he was back in the Royal Marines or in the parachute regiment and said, well, this is what we did. That guy, the team leader, is looking for us to pick holes in it, which is great. And I think it's quite brave. It's interesting. I did hear something on, I think it was Amazon.
Okay.
They have their board meetings, and what they don't do is they don't let the people know what the content of the board meeting or what the discussion is about. Because if you know what it's about, you'll already go into those meetings with your preconceptions or your answers or thoughts. And so what they do is they come in, and whoever's hosting the meeting, whether a female or a male, the peer, they give them 20 minutes to review the paper and put down their thoughts. And because those initial 20 minutes are your actual thoughts. They're not being sort of twisted by someone else's input or discussion. And so you put that down. And what they do is they let everyone in the room talk first. So the peer, maybe the CEO or the chairman, doesn't say anything because he or she, if they spoke first, the rest might also be like, oh yeah, maybe that's the right idea because, or that's the right decision, and influence their actual decisions or answers as well. But what's quite good about it and unique is actually, as the chairman or CEO, someone in that room might have a better idea than you. And so, I love the fact that I think everyone should speak first. I mean, whoever's the commander or the lead should speak last. So you're not having an influence on that room as well. But that's it. But some leaders like to hear their own voice. They like to think, no, my answer is the correct answer. And anyone who thinks that is wrong.
To me, especially in your line of work, man, that's dangerous from a staying alive. The person that is convinced that I have all the answers. It doesn't matter if you're leading a private security business, doesn't matter if you're leading a bank, doesn't matter if you're working on a farm. It's all the same. Is if you have all the answers, it's dangerous and somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's going to get killed. And I think that's a reality. And even if it isn't somebody absolutely losing their life, or people that are in effort to protect losing their life, it can very much be somebody loses their job, somebody loses their home, somebody something dire, and to me it's all the same. Is again going back to what we've said, these all relate. As you spoke about speaking in London, you told me before we were on air about speaking in London and these different professions of speakers, and like, hey, we're all saying the same thing. And I think that's where it's so simple, but yet we get caught up and think, dude, what you're doing is way different than what I do.
Yeah, I think, I get it a lot. I do a lot of guest speaking around the world, and, I call it the battlefield to the boardroom. Everyone loves to know the mindset of, tier one special forces and the decisions they make under pressure and the outcomes of those decisions. But I think, sometimes when we're on the ground, your team leader or your commander, his responsibility is to make sure everyone in that team gets home alive, which is a hell of a responsibility. But then some of these big companies, Fortune 500s, if their boards make the wrong decision, it could have impact which drops the shares. It could make hundreds of thousands unemployed, which then has the affects those families as well. So it's very rash. It's very for me that equates just as difficult. I wouldn't want that on my shoulders. I'd rather look after my 12 in my team than be reliant on looking after hundreds of thousands of families.
Well, I think that, here's the point is like a lot of those executives, we look at layoffs going on around the country. We look at, different factors where we're just economically at now. If they looked at it and said, man, it's life or death, much like if you're, sitting in a situation somewhere, in the middle of a very trying place, and you're like, I need to make sure everyone gets home safe. You're going to make much different decisions than, yeah, I don't know if I want to, risk having that armored vehicle because we might maybe not need it. We don't need the cost. What if we lose it? Whatever else. It's like, it's just a couple people, right? And yet it's almost that dire that it seems like people, executives make decisions where they just don't necessarily care about people.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you're saying that when we do the evacuations, and Israel was a perfect example,
Yeah.
and Afghanistan as well, is that Alana, my wife, gets very much. She's the one who deals with the families, with the people on the ground, communicating, and so she very much gets emotionally involved. And so it's a lot harder for her. It's not that I'm stoic, it's not that I have no empathy. I don't get emotionally involved with the people that I'm dealing with. And the reason for that is I don't want, when I'm on the ground, I don't want my decision to be blurred because of emotion. I need to make the right decision at that time for the group as well. So there is an element of, yes, being emotionally involved, but there's also having the right decision. It's not being emotionally reflective.
So give an example of that, because, and let me put in a period. I believe that this is just my belief, but I want you to say example of it, is that even though you're saying, hey, I need to be stoic, I know the answers, I have the preparation, I believe there's an element of emotion that informs those decisions. That's my belief. Now, you can be in control of your emotions and you can not be hysterical, you can not be, whatever, but again, give us examples of those decisions.
Example, it was a family in Afghanistan, and literally the Taliban were looking for them, and they wanted to move now to one of the safe houses. But what it would have done was potentially compromised our team on the ground, compromised the safe house, and things like that. And so for me, their messaging, Alana, and sending pictures, and the Taliban weren't even there. I had other intelligence sources to say that they were somewhere else. But the pressure and the crying over the phone, and that we need to move them now, their kids were hysterical and scared, which is hard to see. I still said, no, stay firm. And we moved them 36 hours later, and which meant I didn't compromise the team, didn't compromise the safe house. And so, but emotionally, if I got involved, we could have rushed that and maybe made the wrong decision as well. So that's why
I guess I hear that. And I say emotionally, you are looking out for all the people.
Yeah, I'm looking out for them, but I'm looking out for the team. I'm looking out for this is one family. We've still got other families to get out. So you almost
you also have a responsibility for guys on your team to get them back to their family, right?
Yeah. Well, so September 11th, 2012, when the American ambassador got killed, I was there that evening, and I got an oil company called KCA Deutag back from Benghazi to Tripoli. Another security company because they were panicking, we need to get back to Tripoli now. I mean, HQ in Germany were like, we need them there now. What I did is, rather than taking the coastal road from Benghazi to Tripoli, which take like 8 to 10 hours, the issue you then have is you've got drivers from Benghazi, and then you've got Misrata, Tripoli. That's going to cause us trouble in itself. And so what I did is, we came south, and I had a safe house in Zella, and we just stayed there for 36 hours. And what that then did is gave us time to really, because we didn't know what was happening in Benghazi. We just knew it was going off. At this point, we didn't know the American ambassador was killed or the scale of it. And so it gave us an opportunity to really understand what was going on. But behind the scenes, what people didn't realize was, I then had drivers coming in from Tripoli. Those drivers could then get us safely into Tripoli without bringing any attention to us. So again, if I'd listened to HQ, if I'd listened to these German engineers panicking, I had to trust. They had to trust my process and my decision making for it. I couldn't say anything to them at the time because the Benghazi drivers didn't know the Tripoli drivers were coming at this point, because everyone was worried that we're getting paid. They got paid, but really it was just understanding the bigger picture and why we had to do it. But other companies may have bent to the client to say, we need to get them as soon as possible, and done it, and then ended up in a much worse situation.
My belief is that still takes a lot of empathy, and that's a vulnerability, that's a connection, that is, hey, I'm working with you, but I'm looking out for everyone's safety. And I think that's it's the practice that you've shared with us of being proactive, not reactive. It is working on all that support influence, and that informs you so differently that you're not just going helter-skelter in the moment. And that's what impresses upon me, that shows your effectiveness.
I think also as well, a bit difficult with the Afghan one because we were doing it remotely. Whereas in Benghazi, I was there because I always believe that, positivity is contagious, so is negativity, but also fear. So for me, that at least the German engineers could see that I wasn't phased, and so they almost like that gave them an element of comfort. It's not to say that you weren't scared, but we used to use it in the teams as well. If you showed fear, then that would be reflective on your team as well. So it's not that you're fearless, that you almost have to have this facade, this external facade that everyone thinks, well, Dean's not panicking, Dean's calm, then we trust the process. If they see that fear in you and they see that worry in you, then that's going to have a waterfall effect on them. So that was the easiest thing about Benghazi. A bit more difficult when you're dealing with those in Afghanistan because you are in a safer place than they are.
As I hear this, as I think about it, man, that comes from your preparation. That comes from your experience. That it's like, I have the resources, I have the team that I can rely on, that yeah, it may get dire, it may get tight, it may get difficult, but we can get through it.
Yeah. And one of the great things with that family we talked about, I don't really do any follow on as well, but my wife got a video a couple of months back. They've now settled. They're in New York. The youngest child is now I think it's 2 or 3 years old, speaking English. And so it is interesting. And they said that we made the right decision, but at the time for them it was obviously very, very scary. So I try not to get emotionally involved because I don't want to blur my decision, but it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I guess I differ. I don't think the emotion is being, if you allow yourself to be unhinged, and same as leadership in business, if you're making unhinged, just kind of helter-skelter decisions, that's not helping you. But again, if the difference is, man, I need to look out for everyone as opposed to, is my driver the money? Is my driver the status? Is my driver something else? It's like, no, going back to what you said earlier, I'm here to serve people with the skill set that I've been given. And if I do that and I do that over and over and over again, it's going to provide for me, my family, but it's also going to keep everyone safe.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
That's a model of leadership that anyone listening can apply for their family, their business, anything they're doing, their political aspirations. You hold on to that, man, I believe you're going to lead people the best.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
So you talked about this when we were just getting to know each other a little bit, this evolution, right? As we've talked about the things you've done and now in our time together, man, I just want to know, as you've maybe scratched a few things, where do you see this evolution of a person, Dean, going to from your family to, what you're doing? Just like, this is where I think I'm being called to serve people bigger.
Yeah, I think, we chatted before we started, and I was talking about, some of my friends in the special forces still reminiscing on stuff 20 years ago. And I think we have evolutions in life. I want to know what you're doing today. It's great what you've done in the past. And so for my evolutions in life was the military. The military gave me those skill sets, that attitude and drive, which then helped in the private security. Then also with my wife bolted onto that, So we've done that. We've broke world records, cycled world longest roads. We've been recognized. I've just been awarded the MBE from King Charles for my services to sport, humanitarian, and things like that. But I also know that I'm 47 years old. I have this analogy that your body's like a river. It needs to keep moving. As soon as you stop, and your mind as well, not just physically, but mentally, it becomes stagnant. You get illness and things like that. And so for me, it's always about keeping moving. But I always sometimes got the flow of the river wrong. It doesn't always have to be a grade 6 waterfall. And so for me, I'm probably at that next evolution in life that we've done great things. We've got great stories and we've been recognized for that, which is great. But how can I now serve people more massively? So whether it's leadership coaching, whether it's mindset coaching for sporting organizations, military organizations, sort of taking that knowledge that I've got, you don't want to die with that knowledge. You want to be able to pass it on to others that they can, from me, I'll be able to tell them what I learned, what worked, what didn't work, and what I would do differently in all those scenarios. And so for me, that's where I am at the moment. I'm just about to start my next evolution. Whether, everything's been ad hoc, self-employed, whether I get a full-time job and provide that stability for the family, we don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for it. I'm excited to watch and to see it applied. And, as you've applied it just in this conversation, as you've shared how you've applied it leading, not only yourself, your family, the units you've led or whatever else, man, I see a heart of service. And man, I can't help but think that is the way to lead people best. And you've just shared that as an example. And to me, that's what it is, being an impact-driven leader and just having that impact on people.
Yeah, and I think I've been very lucky with my wife. So one of the things we're doing now, we've actually just launched the Blue Rose Foundation. So my wife also got an MBE from King Charles 2 years ago for her services to human trafficking. So we're now launching the Blue Rose Foundation to focus on ending human trafficking through education, task forces, and rehabilitation as well. So yeah, that's going on in the background as well.
So all right,
Go.
With your private security experience and that, like, tell me more about that, because that seems really probably interesting and or very well suited to support in that.
Yeah, so a lot of people,
endeavor.
the movies like Taken and things like that, always have this perception of young children and women being kidnapped and taken. That's 1%. 99% of it's done through grooming. So my wife's designed a online child exploitation online protection program, which we're going to run out to age-specific children, 4 to 7, 8 to 11, all the way through to teachers, parents, law enforcement, judicial systems, and really understand what is grooming. So there's the education side, because for us, everyone likes the sexy stuff, the task force kicking in the doors. But if we can, come in from both ends, if everyone starts getting educated and understands what to look for and the signs, especially on the online stuff and the grooming, then we would limit our task force. I mean, we're also, I have a lot of great resources in the dark web, ex-law enforcement guys, ex-agency guys. A lot of skill sets have now left those jobs who are able to support these law enforcements. Here in the US, I talk about working with 50 countries, and that's what it is, literally with the 50 states. And so we're almost going to be like a conduit between all of them and sort of help them sort of tackle human trafficking here. Then we also have the international stuff with Interpol and other agencies. And then a QRF, a quick reaction force for the likes of Israel, because people don't realize actually the breeding, these natural disasters or, man-made disasters are breeding grounds for predators. That's when they come in and take the children. So we'll have a team that can deploy at a moment's notice for that.
How did your wife get started in that?
Oh, it's her own story. She's been doing it, since the age of 17. She's always wanted to give back at a young age. I mean, there's her own personal story as well. She got sexually assaulted and put 2 guys to prison at the age of 17. And from that point on, wanted to help. And she's been in this space 20 years. And like I said, she works with some of the biggest names behind the scenes. Like I said, King Charles awarded the member of the most excellent order of the British Empire for it. So it's almost like, you have the credibility now, And so once she decided, she does a lot. She has a business book as well called How to Ask for Money. On my bike ride, she raised $1.4 million for the nonprofit. She's amazing. She has her own methodology on how to ask for money, whether it's in business or nonprofits as well. So she's worked with nonprofits in the past and helped them, the development directors. And so when we decided to set up the Blue Rose, everyone was like, we've been waiting for you to do this for a while. So it's that having built up that network, that team, that knowledge, and sort of pushing that out as well.
One final question, Dean. Where can people learn more about you, the Frogmen, all the things you're doing, Blue Rose, which you just mentioned? What's the best way for them to discover more and or possibly support, some of those efforts that you have?
Yeah, so myself, I have Dean Stott website. I'm on Instagram as well. We're just launching the Blue Rose on Instagram, and we also have the bluerosefoundation.org, which is the website as well. So you can see where people can help and give back.
Man, I love it. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you for everyone that is viewing, listening. If you're viewing on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell so that way you get notified whenever we release new content twice a week, Monday and Wednesday, podcasts on Wednesday. As well, if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, make sure that if you could, please rate and review each episode. So that way more listeners can hear from impactful leaders such as Dean. Thank you again for being here. And until next time, choose to lead with impact.